Hello there, I'm Sharon Blackie, and I'd like to tell you a little something about how I came to write The Long Delirious Burning Blue. This was my first book, my first novel, and I didn't write it, or it wasn't published until I was 43 years old. And I guess I'd always wanted to be a writer ever since I was very, very young. But the truth is that when I began writing projects, I very soon abandoned them because I didn't really ever, at any point during that time, feel that I had anything I absolutely had to say. And I'm a great believer in writing having to come from the heart, and for me it just hadn't ever emerged that way until in my late 30s I found myself uprooted from my native lands and stranded, I guess, for a little while in the beautiful state of Kentucky in America, where I was doing a corporate job. It was my second foray into the corporate world. I had already left once, abandoned it, but I was back again due to a very difficult marriage breakup, and I had always known that I was not a corporate person, that this world was not mine, that this was not who I was supposed to be, but somehow I seemed to be stuck in that job, and I couldn't really find the impetus to make the changes. So at that stage in my life, I was, I think, 38 years old. I knew that something had to change. I knew that I had to do something drastic in order to find my way out and to find my way back to the person that I thought I was perhaps supposed to be. But it was proving really very difficult. Anyway, something changed one day, and it sounds very unlikely, but the news came in that John F. Kennedy Jr. had died in a plane accident, and it was an accident in the plane in which he was flying himself. He was a trainee pilot at the time, and there was a great deal of discussion in America at that time about the process of learning to fly, about the difficulties of learning to fly, about the dangers and the pleasures. And I have no idea why, really, to this day. I woke up the very next morning and went down to my local airport and booked a flying lesson. It may not seem like a very radical thing to do, but it was very radical for me because at the time I had a very strong fear of flying. I wasn't too bad in big planes, but the smaller they got, the more nervous I got, and the idea that I would ever go up in the air in something that looked to me all the world like a tin can was really just unthinkable. Also, in the place that I came from, a fairly poor background in the industrial northeast of England, people like me just didn't learn to fly. It would have been unheard of. But I did, and there was something in me that just made me think that I had to do it, as crazy as it seemed to me and to everybody around me, and off I went. It took me, to cut a long story short, it took me about 9 months to get my pilot's license. I moved from Kentucky to the deserts of New Mexico, eventually to get some decent weather so that I could finish it off and do all of the cross-country solo flights that I needed to do to get that license. And it was an amazingly transformative experience for me, as you can perhaps imagine. For me, flying was very much about taking control of fear. And when you believe that every time you get in a plane, you really genuinely do risk death, and it's not as far-fetched as it sounds. There were quite a few accidents for private pilots, particularly in those days, and still very much today. When you believe that, you begin to feel as if you are finally taking control of that fear, and the ability to look death full in the face every day whenever you had a flying lesson was a remarkable lesson in how actually to grasp hold of life and to live fully. And that was a lesson that I very, very much needed to learn as a still quite fearful person in her late 30s. So after that experience, many things shifted inside of me, and I was able finally to make the changes I needed to in my life. I came back to Scotland, to the place where my father's family had always been, and I moved to a small croft in the Northwest Highlands, and there I realised that I did actually, maybe for the first time in my life, have something that I really wanted to write about, something that I really wanted to say. And so I began, in a 3-year period, the novel that became The Long Delirious Burning Blue. It is told from the perspective of 2 characters, a daughter, whose name is Kat, who learns to fly, to overcome a fear of flying, and her mother, a character called Laura, who was an alcoholic when Kat was a child. And the story is very much about how Each of them comes to terms with the past. Laura to understanding the impact that her actions had on her daughter, and Kat in taking control of her fear and understanding also and beginning to come to terms with, finally, the impact that she recognises her mother's drinking had on her as a child. And all of these issues reflected my own life. And the process of writing that book was a very interesting exercise in how memoir permeates fiction, the lines that you have to draw, the changes that you have to make for the sake of a good novel. Like all first novels, I do believe that there is a great deal of real life in there, but there's also many, many things that didn't happen. But that writing of that book was a very healing process for me personally, and particularly because the main themes in it reflected things that I was very passionate about at the time and that I'm very passionate about today, and that is the enduring possibility and indeed necessity of transformation, of continuing to grow, to shapeshift, to change when necessary. Secondly, of the power of myth and storytelling in our lives and the ways in which it can help us literally to reimagine our place in the world and who we are and who we would like to become. At the time I wrote the book, I was practicing as a psychotherapist who specialised in narrative psychology, so this was very real in my working life. And third, the importance of landscape and place in teaching us who we are and kind of reflecting back at us who we are. And that is a passion of mine and central to all of my work at the moment, which those of you who have read If Women Was Rooted, my first non-fiction book, which was published about 8 years after The Long Delirious Burning Blue, that passion for place, that recognition of the ways in which place can teach us and transform us was central to that book and to all that I teach and write about today. If you haven't read The Long Delirious Burning Blue, you can listen on this webpage to a short audio clip of me reading from it. And if you decide to have a look at it, I hope you enjoy it.